My name's Dan, and if you'd told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here, sharing my life with complete strangers, I would have laughed it off. But sometimes life hits you so hard, so out of the blue, that you have no choice but to face it head-on. So here I am, on the other side of my 50th birthday, a night that was supposed to be a celebration, a quiet marker of a good life. Instead, it turned into the night everything I thought I knew crumbled in front of me. You see, I've been married to Karen for 28 years. High school sweethearts, the kind of couple people always pointed to as having it all figured out. And for a long time, it felt like we did. We have a 24-year-old daughter, Emily, who's been the light of my life from the moment she was born. Karen and Emily were always thick as thieves, two peas in a pod, sharing the same blonde hair and quick wit. I thought our family was solid, unshakable. But I was wrong. Terribly wrong. What I discovered on the night of my birthday shattered everything I believed about my wife, my daughter, and the life I thought I was living. Emily has been playing tennis since she could hold a racket, and Mike, her coach, has been with her for years. I never thought twice about him hanging around, coming over for practice, even grabbing drinks with us afterward. He was practically family at this point. Or so I thought. That night, I realized I had been blind to what was happening right under my nose. The two people I loved most, my wife and my daughter, had been hiding a betrayal so deep, it felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. And the worst part? It was all connected to Mike. This isn't just a story about infidelity. It's about the unraveling of everything I thought I knew, the hidden cracks in a life I thought was perfect. So if you think you've seen it all, trust me, you haven't. This is just the beginning. That night, our house was packed with people, neighbors, friends, even a few of my old work buddies. I was mingling, chatting with folks, while Karen and Emily were busy in the kitchen getting the food ready. After a while, I realized I hadn't seen them for a bit, so I figured I'd check in. That's when it happened. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I swear. I was just heading in to grab another beer when I overheard them talking. Emily's voice caught my ear first. "Thanks, Mom, for letting me have him too. I don't know what I'd do without Mike." I froze in place. My brain did a double take, like I couldn't have heard right. But then Karen's voice followed, as calm as ever. "Just don't get too attached. He's only good for one thing. Don't start thinking it's more than that. That's for me." In that moment, it felt like the floor dropped out from under me. The realization that both my wife and daughter were involved with the same guy hit me like a truck. It was one of those times where reality hits so hard, you can barely process it. I stood there in the hallway, trying to convince myself it was some kind of bad dream. Maybe I'd had one too many drinks. But deep down, I knew better. My pulse was pounding in my ears, my heart thudding in my chest. Now, here's the thing, I didn't barge into the kitchen right then and there. Nope. Instead, I did something that I still can't decide was either gutsy or just plain cowardly. I stepped back out of the house, headed straight to the backyard, and found Mike. And that's when I decided to let my fist do the talking. Normally, I'm not the kind of guy who resorts to violence. I've never thrown a punch in my life. But when I saw Mike standing there, laughing with some of my friends like everything was fine, something inside me snapped. I could still hear Karen and Emily's voices echoing in my mind, their calm tones talking about him like he was nothing more than some treat they were passing around. That image, that betrayal, sparked something inside me, and before I knew it, the anger exploded. I marched straight up to Mike, barely holding myself together, and without saying a single word, I swung. The crunch of his nose under my fist was the most satisfying thing I'd ever felt. The whole party went dead silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, people froze with drinks still in their hands, and every eye in the place was on me, like I'd completely lost it. Mike stumbled backward, blood gushing from his nose, his hands flying up in shock. To be honest, even I could hardly believe what I'd just done. But I didn't stop there. I grabbed the front of his shirt and slammed him into the patio table, sending drinks and food scattering everywhere. You thought I wouldn't find out? I yelled, my voice shaking with fury. You really thought I wouldn't figure out you've been screwing not just my wife, but my daughter too? That's when the real chaos started. Karen and Emily burst out of the kitchen, rushing toward us. Karen had that wide-eyed, caught-off-guard look, like she knew she was in trouble but still thought she might talk her way out of it. Emily just stood there, pale and frozen, like she'd been caught red-handed. What the hell is wrong with you, Dan? Karen screeched, trying to pull me away from Mike, but she wasn't strong enough to stop me. The guests had circled around us, like they were watching some kind of gladiator fight, waiting to see what would happen next. What's wrong with me? I shouted back, giving Mike another shove and watching as he wiped his bloody nose on his sleeve. What the hell is wrong with you, Karen? You've been sneaking around with this guy, and you dragged Emily into it too. I expected her to deny it, to try and cover up what was happening. But what she said next, while it didn't surprise me entirely, still hit me like a slap across the face. Dan, calm down. You're overreacting, she snapped, her voice sharp and shrill, like she was the one who had the right to be mad. This isn't what you think it is. You're just misunderstanding everything. Misunderstanding? I glanced around, half hoping someone would tell me this was all just some sick joke. But no one said a word. I turned my gaze on Emily, who still stood there like a statue. Arms crossed, her face a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. And you, I growled, pointing right at her. You let this happen. You're part of this. She flinched, but didn't say anything. She shifted from one foot to the other, like she wished she could disappear. Dad, she started, but Karen cut her off, stepping between us like a shield. Dan, just listen to me, Karen pleaded, her tone softening as she tried to get control of the situation. It's not what you think. Mike's been helping Emily a lot. You know how much pressure she's under with tennis, right? It's been really tough for her, and Mike has been there for both of us, Karen said, her voice firm, as if that somehow justified everything. Really? I couldn't believe the reasoning she was trying to sell me. Helping? Is that what you're calling it now? Just how stupid do you think I am, Karen? Don't you start with the insults, Dan, she shot back, her tone sharp enough to cut through glass. You think you're some kind of saint? You've been checked out for years, more concerned with your job than your own family. You've been oblivious to what's been happening right under your nose, and now you want to play the victim. Give me a break. I blinked, stunned. Was she seriously trying to pin this on me? She was the one having an affair with our daughter's coach, and yet, somehow, in her twisted version of things, it was all my fault for not paying attention. And what about Emily? I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. What excuse do you have for dragging her into this mess? That's when Emily finally spoke up, her voice soft but filled with an unexpected determination. It wasn't like that, Dad. Mike's been helping me, emotionally, mentally. Mom said it was okay. I didn't. I cut her off, unable to listen to any more. Enough. Just stop. I turned away, my eyes scanning the crowd of party guests who were now standing around awkwardly, sipping their drinks and pretending not to see my life falling apart in front of them. Mike, still clutching his broken nose, tried to say something again. Dan, Get out of here, Mike. Now. My voice left no room for argument. He didn't wait for me to say it again. He stumbled toward the gate, blood still streaming down his face, looking completely beaten. As I watched him disappear, the full weight of the situation sank in. My wife and daughter, both tangled up with him. How had things gotten this bad? When Mike finally slunk out of the yard, holding his face, I turned back to Karen and Emily. They stood there, side by side, but the distance between us felt like a canyon. Karen glared at me, arms crossed, as if I were the one at fault. Emily looked lost, fragile even. She hadn't said much after her weak attempt at an explanation, and it was painfully obvious she didn't know how to handle the disaster we were now trapped in. Dan, can we talk about this inside? Karen asked, her voice tight, clearly trying to regain some control. She glanced around at the guests, most of whom were either pretending not to watch or whispering to one another, clearly invested in our family's implosion. I let out a bitter laugh, one that didn't feel like it came from me. You want to talk now? After everything that's happened? I shook my head, barely able to comprehend her audacity. No, Karen. We're way past talking. She rolled her eyes and threw her hands up, like I was the one being unreasonable. Oh, grow up, Dan. This isn't the end of the world. We can handle this like adults. Stop making a scene. Making a scene. I shot back, my voice rising. You had an affair with our daughter's coach. Our daughter's coach. And I'm the one making a scene. You've lost your damn mind, Karen. By now, guests were beginning to trickle out, offering weak excuses about needing to get up early or babysitters waiting for them at home. I didn't care. Let them leave. Let everyone watch this disaster unfold. I wasn't about to hide it for the sake of appearances. I certainly wasn't going to keep pretending to be the clueless husband who never saw it coming. I looked over at Emily, desperately hoping she'd say something, anything, to explain how we ended up here. But she just stood there, her face flushed with shame, her eyes darting everywhere except toward me. So, this is it? I asked, my voice a little lower now, though still simmering with anger. You're both just going to stand here and act like this is normal? Like I'm the one making a big deal out of this? Karen sighed, her frustration bubbling over as she tried to take control of the situation. Dan, I never wanted this to happen. Things haven't been right between us for a long time. You're barely ever home, always busy with work. You haven't even noticed what's been going on with Emily's tennis, or how hard things have been for her. I stared at her, stunned. That's your excuse? You cheated on me because I was working to support this family? Because I wasn't focused enough on Emily's tennis career? She rolled her eyes, waving off my emotions like I was being unreasonable. You just don't get it. Mike was there for both of us. And yeah, maybe things went too far, but you're acting like this was some kind of planned out affair. It wasn't. It just happened. I could barely wrap my head around what I was hearing. It just happened, Karen. Do you even hear yourself? You're admitting to sleeping with another man, and letting our daughter do the same, and you think it's no big deal because it just happened? Emily, who had stayed quiet until now, finally spoke up, her voice shaking. Dad, it wasn't like that. Mom didn't. I cut her off, raising my hand. I don't want to hear it, Emily. No excuses. You're an adult. You knew exactly what you were doing. She winced at my words, but I couldn't find it in me to feel any sympathy. Not after this. I've given everything to this family, I said, my voice trembling with rage I could barely control. Everything. And this is how you repay me. The air was thick with the weight of lies and betrayal. Karen took a step forward, her voice softening like she thought she could somehow smooth things over. Dan, please. We can work through this. It's not that I don't care about you. Things just got complicated. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. That's when I completely lost it. Fix this. I shouted, my voice echoing across the now empty backyard. There's no fixing this, Karen. You can't fix what's broken. You slept with another man, and you dragged our daughter into it. What the hell is wrong with you? She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. You know what? I'm done. I'm done with your lies, your manipulations, everything. You and Emily need to pack your stuff and get out. For the first time, I saw real shock flash across Karen's face. Dan, you can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go? I don't care, I said, my voice steady and cold. Go stay with Mike for all I care. But you're not staying here. Not after what you've done. Sophie's face crumpled, and she looked like she was about to break down in tears, while Karen just stood there, her eyes narrowing as it dawned on her that I wasn't bluffing. This wasn't just some empty threat. I was really kicking them out. Fine, she snapped, her voice ice cold. If that's how you want it, fine. We'll leave. But don't think for a second that this is over. You're not the only one with a say in this marriage. I didn't bother to reply. I simply turned my back on them and walked into the house, my heart hammering in my chest, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. A part of me was still in shock, struggling to comprehend how my wife and daughter, my own family, could have betrayed me so deeply. But there was also a strange sense of relief settling in, because I was done. Done with the lies. Done pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. I didn't know what was coming next, but one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let Karen control my life anymore. I slammed the door behind me, and the silence that followed was suffocating. My heart was still pounding, my hands shaking, but underneath all the adrenaline, there was something else, something that almost felt like peace. That feeling was foreign to me. For years, I had carried the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. I worked long hours, paid the bills, and did everything I could to provide for them. And all that time, what had Karen been doing? Lying to me? Cheating on me? And my daughter, my own daughter, had been caught up in this mess too. I had always thought if things ever fell apart, it would be because of something outside our control, money problems, maybe, or a health scare. But never this. Never would I have imagined that the people I loved most would be the ones to drive the knife in themselves. I could still hear them outside, whispering. They were probably planning their next move, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Karen could spin her web of lies somewhere else. She was an expert at it, after all. What stung the most was realizing how deep Sophie was in this. My little girl, the one I had raised and cheered for at every tennis match, was as much a part of this disaster as her mother. I had thought we were close. Sure, she'd pulled away a bit during her teenage years, but I figured that was normal. Now, I couldn't help but wonder, had I missed something important? Had I been so consumed with work that I failed to see my daughter slipping away? I dropped onto the couch, my head spinning as I tried to make sense of everything. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and for a second, I considered ignoring it. But then I saw it was Karen's mom. Perfect. She probably already knew what was going on. I picked it up, bracing myself for the inevitable lecture. Dan. Her voice was soft, full of concern. I just spoke with Karen. She said you threw them out. What's going on? I let out a heavy sigh, rubbing my eyes. Yeah, I threw them out. They deserve it. There was a long pause on the other end, and I could almost feel the weight of her judgment through the phone. Dan, are you sure this is the right thing to do? I know Karen made mistakes, but throwing her and Emily out of their home? That's drastic. Mistakes? I scoffed, nearly laughing at the absurdity of it. Margaret, she's been sleeping with Sophie's tennis coach. And apparently, Sophie's involved too. What the hell am I supposed to do with that? The silence on the other end stretched so long that I worried she might have hung up. But finally, her voice came through, quiet and hesitant. Dan, I don't know what to say. Yeah, well, neither do I replied bitterly. But I do know one thing now. I'm done with it. Are you really going to go through with this? She asked, her voice trembling. Divorce? Kicking them out? I leaned back into the couch, staring at the ceiling like it might have answers for me. Kathy, I don't see another option. I can't trust Karen anymore. And Sophie. My voice caught, faltering for a second. I don't even know who she is right now. Dan, don't do something you'll regret. I know this is awful. God, I can't even begin to imagine what you're going through. But maybe, with time, things can be worked out. Maybe it's not as bad as it seems. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. No, Kathy. It's worse. It's way worse. And I don't think there's anything left to save. The line went quiet again, neither of us knowing what else to say. Kathy, bless her, was probably trying to figure out a way to make sense of all this, to find some way to fix it. But this wasn't her mess to fix. After a while, she finally spoke up. If they need somewhere to go, Dan, you know they can come to me. I hope you're okay with that. I know things are tough, but I can't bear the thought of them having nowhere to stay. I let out a long, tired sigh. They're your family. Do what you need to, but don't think it's going to change my mind. Once I hung up, an overwhelming wave of exhaustion hit me, as though all the fight had drained from me. I sat there, staring blankly at the wall, trying to come to terms with the reality I was facing now. No wife, no daughter, and a house that suddenly felt far too big for just one person. A few minutes passed before I heard the front door creak open. Karen and Sophie were coming back in, but this time, there was an eerie stillness about them. They moved quietly, cautiously, like they were tiptoeing around a sleeping giant. I watched as they headed up the stairs, probably to gather their things. For a fleeting moment, I considered stopping them, maybe even taking back what I'd said, letting them stay, pretending we could somehow fix this. But then I remembered the sound of their voices in the kitchen, casually talking about sharing a man like he was nothing more than an accessory. My anger flared back up, and I pushed myself off the couch, striding toward the stairs. Karen appeared at the bottom, a suitcase in hand, her face pale and worn. Sophie followed closely behind, clutching a duffel bag, her eyes swollen and red, but still not meeting mine. You both better be gone by the time I get back, I said, my voice hard and unshaken. Karen paused, staring up at me with a mix of shock and pity. You're really doing this? I am, I replied, my jaw tight. She let out a sigh, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe it. You'll regret this, Dan. You'll see. You're throwing away your family for nothing. For nothing. I shot back, my voice rising. I'm throwing away my family because you already did. She didn't say another word, just walked past me, Sophie trailing behind her. I heard the soft click of the door as it closed behind them, and suddenly, I was left standing in a house that, just hours ago, had felt like home. The silence that followed was suffocating. After Karen and Emily left, it wrapped around me like a thick fog, heavy and all-consuming. I could hear every little sound, the creaking floorboards, the wind rattling the windows, as if the house itself was reminding me of how empty it had become. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the door, waiting for the reality of what had just happened to hit me. And when it finally did, it hit like a punch to the gut. I was alone. Completely, undeniably alone. My wife of 28 years was gone, and my daughter, my own daughter, had walked out with her. The house, once filled with the warmth of family dinners and the sounds of Emily practicing her serves, now felt cold, empty, and lifeless. I tried to convince myself that I had made the right choice, that kicking them out was the only option. How could I stay under the same roof with two people who had betrayed me so deeply? But the longer I stood there, the more doubt began to creep in. Had I been too rash? Could I have handled it differently? Was this a mistake? I wandered into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and grabbed a beer, sinking into a chair at the table. The cold bottle in my hand was grounding, something solid to focus on when everything else felt like it was slipping away. I took a long drink, but the beer did nothing to dull the ache that pressed in on me from every angle. My mind kept replaying the moment I walked into the kitchen earlier that day, overhearing Karen and Emily's hushed conversation. The shock of their words, the weight of realizing that everything I thought I knew was crumbling beneath me. It played out in my head again and again, slow and agonizing. I couldn't shake the image of Emily, my little girl, laughing with her mother about sharing Mike, like it was the most normal thing in the world. The two people I loved most had conspired behind my back, treating me like some kind of oblivious fool. The pain of it all was beyond words. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the ceiling, trying to make sense of where it all went wrong. Our marriage wasn't perfect, what marriage was? But I thought we were solid. Sure, I had worked long hours, and maybe I hadn't been as present as I should have been, but I thought we were a team. I believed we had something real. But now, looking back, I could see the cracks that had been there all along, the ones I had chosen to ignore. I had convinced myself that our marriage was as strong as I wanted it to be. And then there was Emily. My little girl. She had always been a daddy's girl, always looked up to me. But in the last few years, she had grown more distant, more secretive. I chalked it up to her being a teenager, figuring it was just part of growing up. I never, in my wildest dreams, imagined she would betray me like her mother had. As I sat there, the anger that had driven me earlier began to dissolve, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary sadness. It seeped into every part of me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something precious had been lost forever. It was the kind of sadness that sinks deep, the kind you feel when you realize your entire life was built on a foundation that's now turned to dust. The kind that makes you wonder if you'll ever be able to rebuild. I didn't know what to do with that feeling. After a while, I got up from the table and wandered aimlessly around the house. The place was still dressed up from the party, balloons tied to the chairs, empty glasses scattered across the counter, and bits of cake still sitting on plates. The sight felt like a cruel joke. My birthday, meant to celebrate 50 years of life, had become the night I lost everything. I drifted into the living room and noticed a picture frame had fallen off the wall. The glass was cracked. I'd seen it earlier in the week but hadn't gotten around to fixing it. I picked it up and looked at the photo inside, a snapshot of me, Karen, and Emily from a vacation years ago. We looked happy, carefree, like the perfect family. As I held that broken frame, a familiar ache settled in my chest. Had that happiness ever been real, or was it just another illusion? I thought about calling someone, maybe a buddy, or my sister, but the thought of explaining this whole mess felt too humiliating. How do you even begin to tell someone that your life has unraveled in the most painful, twisted way possible? How do you put into words that the family you spent years building has crumbled? So I did nothing. I just sat there, alone in the dimming light, feeling the weight of everything pressed down on me like a suffocating blanket. I was about to head to bed when the front door suddenly swung open. Karen stormed in, her face flushed with anger. Emily was right behind her, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "We need to talk," Karen said sharply. "You can't just throw us out like that, Dan. This is our house, too." I blinked, stunned by her audacity. After everything, she had the nerve to act like I was the one in the wrong. I slowly stood up, crossing my arms over my chest. "Karen, you have no right to tell me what I can or can't do in my own home. Not after what you've done." Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped forward defiantly. "Oh, don't you dare act like the innocent victim here, Dan. You're not blameless. You've been distant for years, completely absorbed in your work. You barely paid attention to me or Emily. You think that doesn't come with consequences?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So this is my fault now? You cheated on me, Karen. You brought Emily into this mess. And now you're standing here trying to pin the blame on me? Don't twist my words," she snapped, her voice rising. "I'm not excusing what happened. But maybe if you had been more present, if you'd cared more about your family, things wouldn't have gotten so out of hand." The anger bubbled up inside me, ready to explode. "You're unbelievable. You and Emily have been lying to me, going behind my back for who knows how long, and now you want to turn this into my failure. No. I'm not letting you spin this around. She crossed her arms, mirroring my stance, her jaw clenched tight. You can kick us out all you want, Dan, but we'll see what happens when the lawyers get involved. I'm not going to let you discard us like trash. Karen's words were sharp, and behind her, Emily stood in silence, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't say anything, just looked at me with those big, sorrowful eyes that used to melt my heart. Now, they only deepened the ache inside me. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice steady. Karen, get out. Both of you are going to have to deal with the fallout from this, but tonight, you're leaving. I thought she might push back, but instead, she turned on her heel and walked out. Emily followed close behind. The door slammed shut, and for the second time that night, I was alone. But this time, a different emotion swept over me, relief. As the door clicked shut behind them, the house sank into an even deeper silence, but it wasn't the suffocating kind anymore. Their absence seemed to lift a weight from the air, draining some of the poison that had filled the house. I dropped back into the chair at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty beer bottle in front of me. The emotions swirling inside me were a strange mix. Was I still angry? Absolutely. The betrayal was like a knife lodged in my chest, one that wouldn't be removed easily. But with the anger came something new, something I hadn't expected, relief. It wasn't relief that my family had fallen apart. No, it was more the relief that the pretending was over. I didn't have to keep up the facade anymore, didn't have to act like the oblivious husband who didn't see the lies and deceit happening all around him. Now it was all laid bare, ugly, painful, but real. For the next few hours, I wandered through the house. Every room, every corner, held memories of the life I thought I had. Photos hung on the walls, the tennis rackets leaned by the front door, and the faint scent of Karen's perfume still lingered in the air. But none of it felt real anymore. It all seemed like part of some elaborate set for a life that had never truly existed. I knew I couldn't sit around waiting for whatever came next. Karen had made it clear that she wasn't going to go quietly, and I had no doubt she'd be on the phone with a lawyer first thing in the morning. I needed to get ahead of it, to protect myself and whatever piece of sanity I still had left. The first step was calling my lawyer. The thought of explaining everything made my stomach turn, but I didn't have a choice. I dialed the number, and after a few rings, I heard the calm, professional voice of Laura, a no-nonsense attorney who had helped me with real estate matters in the past. Dan, she answered. What's going on? You sound tense. Tense doesn't even cover it, I replied, rubbing my temples. I need to talk to you about something personal. It's bad. I'm going to need a divorce lawyer. Laura didn't miss a beat. All right, let's get into the details. What happened? So, I laid it all out, the affair, the involvement of my daughter, the blow-up at the party. By the time I finished, my throat was raw, every word a reminder of the betrayal I had just lived through. Laura was quiet for a moment, absorbing everything I'd said. Dan, I'm really sorry you're going through this. It's going to be tough, but we'll get through it. First things first, we need to get all the financials in order. Do you have any evidence? Texts, emails, anything like that? I shook my head, though she couldn't see me. No, I just overheard them talking. I don't have any hard proof. That's okay, Laura reassured me. We'll work with what we've got for now. Just keep your head down and avoid any unnecessary confrontation with Karen. I'll get the paperwork started and reach out once everything's in place. After hanging up, I felt a small flicker of control return to me. It didn't fill the gaping hole in my life, but it was a step, a plan to help navigate through the wreckage. The days that followed blurred together. Karen and Emily moved in with Karen's parents, and honestly, that suited me fine. I wasn't ready to face either of them. I needed space to breathe. Laura moved quickly, and within a week, I had the divorce papers in hand. I knew Karen wouldn't make this process easy, but at least I was taking the first steps toward leaving the nightmare behind. What hit me hardest during those quiet days wasn't Karen's absence, but the emptiness left by Emily. The sense of failure gnawed at me constantly. I had raised her to be strong, intelligent, and independent, and yet I hadn't seen this coming. I missed the warning signs, missed how she had become entangled in her mother's toxic influence. Now it felt like she was gone, not just physically, but emotionally. I had no idea how to reach her. I thought about calling her, about trying to bridge the gap between us. But each time I picked up my phone, I put it down again. I wasn't ready. And honestly, I didn't know if I ever would be. She had made her choice. I understood Karen's manipulation played a role, but it didn't change the fact that Emily had betrayed me. Then, about 2 weeks after the party, I got a text from Emily. "Dad, can we talk?" My heart sank as I read the message. I had been dreading this moment, but I knew it was coming. I texted back, *sure. Come over tomorrow, *. The next day, she showed up at the house, looking pale and anxious. She stood in the doorway, clutching her purse like a lifeline, guilt etched across her face. "Dad!" She started, her voice trembling, "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Mom said it was okay, and I didn't know how to stop it once it started." With a heavy sigh, I gestured for her to sit. "Emily, I love you, but I don't understand how you let this happen. You're an adult. You knew what you were doing. This isn't something you can just brush off as a mistake." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I know, Dad. I messed up. I don't know why I went along with it. I didn't want to disappoint Mom. She was so insistent that it would help me with tennis. And I believed her. I should have come to you. I should have told you everything." I leaned in, looking her straight in the eyes. "Emily, I would have done anything for you. You didn't need to turn to Jake. You didn't need to let this happen. But you did. And now we're here." She wiped away her tears and nodded. "I'm sorry, Dad. I really am." I sank back into my chair, running a hand through my hair. The weight of it all was overwhelming. I don't know where we go from here. I can't say if we'll ever get back to the way things were. But I do know this, you're my daughter, and I will always love you. We'll figure this out, but it's going to take time." She nodded, sniffling, absorbing what I said. "I understand." We sat in silence, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it felt like a step forward. Unlike Karen, who never apologized or tried to make amends, Emily had at least acknowledged her mistakes. That was something. The divorce dragged on longer than it should have, but eventually, it was finalized. I kept the house, and Karen moved in with Jake. Not that I cared, they deserved each other. As for me, I started the slow, painful process of rebuilding my life, piece by piece. It wasn't easy. Some days, the weight of everything felt like it would crush me. But amidst the struggle, I found a strange kind of freedom in starting over, knowing the worst was behind me. I wouldn't say I came out of this unscathed. The scars ran deep, and they would likely never fully heal. But through it all, I learned valuable lessons, about my boundaries, my resilience, and the strength I never knew I had. If I could offer one piece of advice to anyone reading this, it's this: trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Don't let someone else's lies cloud your reality. Because when the truth comes to light, it will be more painful than you can imagine. But once you face it, once you confront the lies and reclaim your life, that's when the healing can truly begin.